everybody, and welcome to JOII, the podcast that brings you education and information on endometriosis and adenomyosis. This is part 2 of my conversation with Johanna.
I did see, with talking to a lot of people, how national patient organizations, like in Ireland, like in Australia, like in New Zealand, they seem to be really spot on with accurate information, and it always rises and falls with whoever is leading it, and how you said, how clear the information is, how up to date the information is. But we also really need to be aware that people base their treatment decisions on that information, and that can have a huge impact, and it's really hard to know, can I rely on them? And I think there's also a big issue how insurance reasons, and obviously it's a really tricky thing, that often you have to limit the feedback that you give about healthcare professions on public forums, and a lot of forums only allow positive feedback. They don't really allow negative feedback. They don't really allow critical feedback, and that can be really tricky when someone might be a really lovely gynecologist, but they might not be very up to date with endometriosis care, and they might get really good reviews that way, or every bad treatment or out-of-date treatment still helps some people, but that is still not very good standard care, and that can be really misleading. So I think that's why we certainly still need advocates, like you said, to keep things in check. Yeah. So I was just watching, unfortunately, when Dr. Redwine died, but it just reminded me again of the documentary he made he was involved in the 80s. And I was honestly shocked watching a documentary from the 80s where people from all over the world were being interviewed and were discussing the exact same things we are still discussing. How there are so many gynecologists who are still not up to date with endometriosis care, who still use out-of-date treatments, who still aren't as working in an interdisciplinary team as it should be, how we still are hit with so much misinformation and so much substandard care, and still not believed, and still gaslit, and still not being treated the way we are supposed to be treated, and how it's such a huge prevalent issue, and yet we still wait years and years to get diagnosed and then to get, hopefully, gold standard treatment, but we know that the majority of us don't. So it was really shocking watching this documentary, and they have the perms and all the 80s, 90s clothes, and you think, Jesus, that's like ages ago, it's 50 years ago, but you think, this could have been me with them, because I just had the same conversation with my friends the other day. So it seems like, while you said earlier, you can't understand how you're still having the same conversations, that doesn't seem to have much changed the past 50 years. So has there been any progress? What progress has there been? What's the standard in Ireland at the moment? Where are we in terms of endometriosis care? Is the Irish standard of endometriosis care as it should be? Is it standard compared to globally? Where are we at the moment?
I suppose the blanket answer to that is, it's very tempting to say, no, nothing's changed. That's absolutely all horrendous and it's terrible. On the whole, people still cannot access timely and appropriate and sufficient care for their endometriosis in Ireland. I'll die on that hill because, people need timely access, because the damage we're doing to their mental health, their physical health, their fertility, everything is affected. Their education, their work, their family life, their social relationships, so many things are damaged just because we get this wrong at the beginning. So I suppose if I look at what has changed, the delay to diagnosis, we don't have the data, but from the last data, it was an average of 9 years. This study needs to be repeated. If anybody wants to fund me, I'd be very happy to do that. It's one of those things where, we're making guesstimates based on other European data. Now, fortunately, the worldwide data pretty much is the same everywhere. And despite all the advocacy work, and despite all of the education programs and all the things that have been run, the last conference that I was at, which is a couple of years back now, they did present a paper that showed that the delay in diagnosis had not come down. And this was still very multifactorial when we look at it. I do find it, again, this is anecdotally because I don't have the papers to back this up. When I speak to GPs now are a lot more aware of endometriosis. They know a lot more about it. Patients are coming in a lot more educated about it. They're bringing in their own information. They're bringing in maybe an information leaflet, or they've found something online. That has definitely shifted. That's been a huge thing. I suppose back 25 years ago, when I started talking about endometriosis, people were like, would you shut up? Don't be talking about things like that in polite company, basically. Periods, no, don't be talking about it. Painful sex, don't be talking about it. Horrendous bowel movements, don't be talking about it. Bleeding all over the place, don't be talking about it. That has persisted quite a bit for some people. And I think the opener for me was the very first incarnation of this particular EndoMarch run by the NAJAT. We were to have the first one here in Ireland, and along with them. And I polled people, I was like, oh, will we do an EndoMarch? And it was 90-something% came back and went, absolutely not. I'm not going to be seen in public to have anything to do with endometriosis. My family doesn't know. My employer doesn't know. We don't even follow the Facebook page. We don't follow the Instagram page. We don't want or have a will to be associated with it because it's still a shame and embarrassment. Jump forward then to 2019 and last year, where we had 2 very successful EndoMarches. People have really, really moved on. And we see that then again in the use of social media and sharing their stories and sharing it in traditional media as well too. People are starting to become a lot more comfortable talking about their bodies, talking about their bodily autonomy, talking about their rights again as a patient to appropriate and timely treatment. So again, there's that patient side, the education level has gone up. GP side, the education and awareness has gone up. The bottlenecks now tend to be that GPs find that if they follow again like the ESHRE guidelines, they are allowed to make a presumptive diagnosis and they can start medical management. If the patient is not responsive to treatment, which we usually find with most people that, they're going to have some breakthrough pain or some breakthrough issues, they would then progress on to referral to gynecology and then to surgery. But we know there's huge bottlenecks here. Even to see a routine gynecologist, the waiting lists are crazy because when your hospital goes into surge due to, winter respiratory viruses or winter vomit bugs or whatever is going on, gynecology is the first list that's going to get hit. And this has been going on for years. And this causes this knock-on effect then where you've got this never-ending waiting list. Waiting times for imaging is also a problem too. And when I've spoken to GPs, I've given talks to GPs here in Donegal, it has been the worry that we can't refer everybody, So I've given them a few tips as to how to differentiate those patients between your normal period pain and somebody who may be presenting with endometriosis. And that's the painful sex is always one red flag that people forget to ask, and nobody volunteers that. So that's always one that, they should ask as a differentiator. And the other one is, have they missed something really important in their lives? Have they missed like a very serious exam? Have they missed, their best friend's wedding? Have they missed, like an interview for a job? Or have they missed like a really, important social event due to their symptoms? And they're 2 massive red flags that you could use to filter down. We, of course, need more health resources in Ireland. And the minister promised last year that we were going to have this hub and spoke approach to endometriosis centres. We've heard this before in lots of other areas of health. We've seen it tried to be rolled out in different countries as well. It sounds fantastic. I don't think Ireland is big enough for what they're describing. We do not have that, level of expertise. We don't have that level of people trained up. We certainly don't have the infrastructure to pull all that together because, unfortunately, with the current contracts that people are under, they can't just work on endometriosis. They have to work on all gynecology. So you're never going to get that skill set where you're the one performing hundreds of surgeries every year. You're maybe doing hundreds of surgeries, but they're not hundreds of stage 4 endometriosis. They're not hundreds of, bowel resections. They're not hundreds of diaphragmatic endometriosis. So in one way, the country's not big enough to have multiple specialist centres at very high level. But at the same time, there is definitely room for regional centres where patients could access, maybe up to stage 1, stage 2 of the disease. But unfortunately, based on my calculations, when I looked at the model that was proposed, and perhaps I'm wrong, but nobody's come back to challenge me, that the current model will not address the level of care that we need, because they're making the assumption that only severe cases are those with stage 4 endometriosis. And we know that that's not the case. I have known people with stage 1 endometriosis whose life is turned upside down. They can't work. They can't focus. They are on severe levels of high-strength opioid medications. They are maybe, just their life is just turned upside down. I've also met people with stage 4 endometriosis who did not know that they had it until they went to try for a child. And as a result, infertility was their only and primary symptom. So making this notion that it's only severe cases that need to be treated, I think anybody presenting with life-changing, debilitating symptoms deserves the same level of care and attention that we would give to any other disease. And certainly when it's, thrown back to me that not everybody can see a specialist, not everybody needs, an excision surgeon, not everybody needs, a multidisciplinary team. Equally, I always ask them, like, if you had to go in for cardiac and cardiothoracic surgery in the morning, do you want the podiatrist to come in and do it? Do you want the physio to come in and do it? Do you want somebody who's just dabbled in a wee bit of general surgery? Do you want somebody from the lab to come up and do it? We all sort of generally know where the heart is. We could probably figure most of it out. Or do you want somebody who's doing this surgery every single day that they're working in a year? I think I would take my chances with somebody who has done that type of surgery repeatedly, who is monitored for that type of surgery. They're part of an accredited body. They also have to show their work. It certainly comes from a lab background. Like, accreditation is so important. We have to prove not only that the results that we put out are accurate, we check it through multiple different methods, but that should be the same for surgery, and it should be the same for everything. And I know in the German-speaking countries in Europe, there is an accreditation scheme, the EuroEndoCert. And certainly the last time I looked at it, I was quite impressed because the patient organisations were involved in it as well. And the patient organisation had a weighted score within that accreditation process as well too. So they were able to feed back on things like patient experience and, how the patients felt about that. There's no ideal accreditation scheme out there at the minute because, first of all, we don't have any defined standards. And second of all, we don't even have a definition, an internationally accepted definition as to what an endometriosis specialist surgeon is. So until we take gynecology out of the basement, first of all, and then we take endometriosis out of the absolute sewer pipes under the basement, because it's so far down the list, we need to elevate it. Women's health, we know, look, like, don't get me started on misogyny and, the patriarchy and the whole lot of here all night. But until women's health is elevated to the same level as other health conditions that affect both genders, or something that predominantly affects males, we're never going to see change. I can go into the chemist and trip over 67 boxes of medication for erectile dysfunction. I can buy it over the counter if I want, but I go in to get, like pain medication or maybe, hormonal treatments or, things like that. And it's impossible. They're either out of stock, they don't have them, or there's 101 questions. We know that when women present to emergency departments, in the same level of pain or more than their male counterparts, they're not given the same amount of pain medication. Their pain's not even taken seriously. So I suppose endometriosis is part of that huge chunk. And I think, women, and that's women in the whole inclusive form, if we do not raise our voices on this, we are not going to see change. And I think Ireland could be a leader in this. We're a small enough country. There are surgeons out there who do have an interest. There are GPs out there who are, they would be so excited to see something that they could refer their patients to, because at the minute, their hands are tied, their hearts are broken, seeing these patients coming back in month after month with very little to do and very, very few places to send them. And if you can't leave this country for surgery, the 2 surgeons who are using excision at the minute, again, their lists are very long. They don't always have the multidisciplinary team in place, and the support doesn't seem to be there. And again, we're basing this on anecdotal evidence back from patients because there's nothing published. There's no data out there.
So it really seems like the National Framework for Endometriosis Care that was just released last year, it sounds like on paper a really nice plan. But I think if you look into it, like all the things you just mentioned, it just doesn't hit the nail, because where do we get the surgeons from when they're not trained already, and when they're still tied up in contracts, so they can't actually specialize? And they might be able to help some of us, but what about the other cases? And the severe cases aren't so rare, and the moderate cases aren't so rare. And we know that stage 4, like he said, doesn't necessarily mean really little quality of life. So we know we have a lot of information, but it doesn't seem to trickle into the healthcare system, and it doesn't seem to end up with us where we actually benefit from it. So it's tricky, isn't it?
It is. And the healthcare system is slow to change. You know, like from being inside it now for so many years, and you'll know yourself, you'll see it, you know, change is slow. And change of process is very slow. We're in a recruitment freeze again at the moment. That's not going to help anything. We run out of money constantly for lots of reasons. And again, I think until we prioritize women's health, we're not going to make any progress. And the framework looks lovely on paper. If we hadn't stole somebody else's homework, I think it would be brilliant. But unfortunately, that's just what we do in this country. We look at what other countries are doing and we try and shoehorn it in here. We're sort of, oh yeah, that'll fit in Ireland. But the one thing about that framework is that if you don't speak to a wide representation of the people who are involved, you might as well not bother, because you need to speak to a wide representation. You need to speak to the patients who have had surgery. You need to speak to the patients who have not yet been diagnosed. You need to speak to the patients who are in the middle of fertility treatments. You need to speak to the patients who have had repeated hormonal suppression and they're getting nowhere. You need a wide spread. We've had, you know, the term actually evades me at the minute, but we've had those fora where, you know, for the abortion referendum and for the legalization of drugs recently, we've had those conversations and wide representation of people from all over the country. That's actually what's needed for endometriosis, because it's such a diverse disease and it affects people so differently. You know, I get asked quite a bit like about disability benefit maybe for endometriosis. And, you know, I've inquired about this before, like in informal ways, you know, on behalf of people, and you're sort of told on the list, endometriosis is not a disability. Most people can work with it, it's fine. You're like, okay, but the one person who can't work with it, maybe, is there anything we can do for them? It's endometriosis, no. So we do need to reframe our thinking around it. And I think because we tied it into menstruation for so long, and we tied it up as a gynecological female disease and the whole lot, I think it's time to start recognizing as a systemic, chronic, inflammatory, you know, body-wide process that it is. The research will catch up. It'll catch up eventually with what everybody's been saying. And again, it's another one of my sort of, you know, things that I sort of go on about so much, is that any research that's done, any policies that's made, any decisions in this country around endometriosis needs to involve the patients. Not necessarily needs to involve me, but it needs to involve a wide variety of patients. Be that people who, again, you know, may find that hormonal suppression works really well for them. You might find people who've had to have multiple excision surgeries because their endometriosis is quite aggressive. They're in that small percentage of people where they have true recurrence. And it's not just MISE disease. You need to have people then who are maybe managing their symptoms through the, you know, medical cannabis access program. You would learn so much from it. And if I could download my brain and all the people that I've spoken to, I think it would make a huge difference, because I've got the collective experience of thousands and thousands of women over the last 25 years. And, you know, I think if people listen to that and really listen to it, it would be important. And I know one of the things, when back in 2019, I presented to the Women's Health Task Force, and I had put the call out early in the 2019 when they were looking for situations and looking for things to cover. And I'd asked people to submit their stories to them. And when I presented to the Women's Health Task Force, they were taken aback. The two things that caused a landslide amount of emails to men was menopause and endometriosis. And they were shocked by the stories. We then presented to the Dáil later on that year in November. And again, people were shocked. Senators and TDs shocked by the personal stories that their constituents had sent in. And again, vowed to try and help in any way that they could. But I think when you're dealing with a very flawed healthcare system in a very flawed healthcare system worldwide. It's not just unique to Ireland. It's very, very difficult, isn't it?
I think really, like you said, we need to listen to the people who actually suffer and are in pain. Like, there might be loads of people going to work and being fine, but are they fine? Or do they have just no other choice? And there might be loads of people being fine under hormonal contraception or with the ablation, but what's the percentage? And are they fine? Or do they just not have another choice? And like you also said earlier, fair enough, Ireland is a small country. It's very different putting up a service like we'd have in Germany, UK, whatsoever, because we have so many more taxes, you have so many more people, the population is just very different. But if we aren't able to provide the standard of care that someone deserves, especially with such a debilitating disease, we should at least help them accessing it, going abroad. And we should at least then try to update the training of people who are actually involved with the people, with the patients, so that even to the degree that the medical system can help, even if they're tied because of the healthcare system isn't employing any more people, or we can't afford an actual specialist center, but the information being provided and the treatment being provided needs to be up to date. And still, it's unbelievable how we're in the 21st century and how so many of us still, it doesn't just take forever and ever to get diagnosed. We still then end up, a lot of us, with out-of-date treatment that's just causing more harm. And this is why I think when you keep saying nothing for us without us, like, we have the information, like we know what hasn't worked, what is working, we know what the research is pointing towards, whereas endometriosis is coming from. It's not retrograde menstruation. Will we not take the ovaries and the uterus out anymore? But like, what else have you been developed so far? And listening to the patients and being like, is my treatment still working? What are the third of people doing? They're happy with my treatment. They come back and they tell me how happy they're with the treatment. What about the huge majority who we are failing? They're never coming back because we failed them. They're going somewhere else and looking for answers somewhere else. And this really flaws the system. And like you said, in any medical area, you need to be able to be criticized and update your information and your knowledge and your training. And we need to take this more serious. It's, like you said, not just a menstrual disease. It's not a menstrual disease. It happens to cause menstrual issues, but it's so far away from a menstrual disease.
It is. And what's worrying for me is that, I'm seeing younger and younger women now being diagnosed with very deep endometriosis and very widespread endometriosis at a very young age. And I suppose we should acknowledge the things that are working well within this country at the minute. And for some patients, they have been able to access treatment abroad. And they have very supportive GPs. They've been able to use either their insurance or the cross-border directive. Some have self-paid. It shouldn't be the case that we have to export our healthcare. But unfortunately, that has been the only choice for a lot of people, and myself included. I had to travel to Atlanta to have my surgery. My alternative was to find €40,000 for a spinal cord stimulator that was never going to work to reduce my pain or remove the endometriosis and adenomyosis that was in there. So no matter how informed of a patient you are, you can still be led down treatment paths that may not be appropriate for you. So having a well-educated healthcare team is very important. We don't always have great choice, or we don't always have the luxury of being able to choose who's on our healthcare team. In particular, if you're on the public system, like, you may end up with somebody different every time that you go in. I am seeing a reluctance in some cases where they don't wish to sign referral forms. I have seen a huge reluctance and a refusal to sign the treatment abroad scheme for surgeries to be carried out with specialist surgeons within Europe, where the surgery is not available in Ireland. It's not even under any description, but it seems like nobody wants to give in and actually say that. And I don't have the evidence to back this up, but I would love to see if this was pediatric cardiac care, would it be the same? If it was, male orthopedic care, would it be the same? Would it be a no? So we don't have that information. That information is not freely available, unfortunately, but it makes me very mad. And I think as I see younger and younger women, it worries me and it frustrates me. And I do see that where patients who can get out and have really good surgery and such improved quality of life, it is amazing. But we are living with chronic long-term conditions, and we can remove the lesions, and it will make a huge difference. And I've never once heard any of the excision surgeons say that they're going to cure anybody or they're going to give them 100% of their life back. I know certainly I was given at best a 70% improvement. I was able to reduce the pain medication with 95%. That to me is a massive win. And even with the level of pain I have now, and I do have to take opioids every day, that's left from the damage from the previous 7 surgeries before that, and from endometriosis that was left in place from the very day and hour that I was in there as an embryo, cooking away. My endometriosis had laid itself down over, particular nerve tracts, and because it was never removed at the previous surgeries, it had done a lot of damage, So I think if we can get to the point where we can get patients in, get them seen to, get them, through some shape or form of safe diagnosis and safe access to treatment, I think that's so important. And I don't think it's too aspirational. I do think as women, we have the power to change this. It's going to take a lot of shouting. It's going to take a lot of voices. And, I was reminded again, actually, funny enough, this week or last week, I think it was, that I can't save everybody, and not to get upset and frustrated, like I can save everybody. But it is one of those things where I think we have to keep trying. For me, I certainly feel that responsibility on my shoulders. I have to keep trying. And I might be the only person at a particular week doing that, and that's fair enough. But like I said earlier on, I am surrounded by a strong and positive team. And it's not just women. I have their partners, I have their children, who take part in events like the EndoMarch. They take part in events like, like fundraising, and they'll do all sorts as well too. So it truly is a community event. So on that sort of positive side, I think, community, I think is strong and important.
It does really come back to that one strong factor. It needs one person to speak about an experience for someone else to lose the shame, to be like, hold on, maybe this isn't as abnormal. Maybe this is something really important to speak about. Like, I think only by talking about certain things, we break down the stigma and the shame, we normalize it more, but it also gives someone else possibly the realization, hold on a second, I always thought I'm the only one. I always thought this is normal. By someone else speaking up and saying, I had to get treatment. This is a condition that needs to be taken really serious. That person might come out and be like, maybe I need to start looking into this. And I think we quite underestimate how one person opening up and having getting over this, which can be a huge struggle to open up about experience. It's not a sexy disease to talk about. No one talks about painful bladder and bowel and sex and those kind of things. And unless you're a physician from Germany, you love talking about those things. But it's not easy, it's not nice. And getting over that and speaking about it will have a huge impact on other people's lives. You never know whose life it changes. And there's certain people who are not comfortable at all, who are just staying in the background, who might be sharing the right information, but rather feel not to share more personal stuff, which is perfectly fine too. But I do think the realization of there is power in sharing, and you never know who you help. And I know you've seen this loads, and I've even just seen this the past couple of years. You start, and there's a few more people around you who learn. And each of those people, it's a bit like a pyramid scheme, but in a good way. Each of those people, well, let's call it the snowball system. Each of those people then share and spread information again and create more awareness. And that small little act of opening up, having a conversation, doesn't even need to go to the newspaper, to the radio, but this small act, even just opening up about, this is what I have and this is where I got treatment, can be huge. I remember when I got my surgery report back and I asked my partner to get it printed, and his printer in the studio was broken. So he went into town and got it printed in town in a coffee shop. And the girl who was working in the coffee shop saw that it was like the big Endometriosis Central logo from when I traveled abroad. And she said to my partner, I'm really sorry for being so nosy and looking at this, but are you a doctor? My partner's an artist. He burst out laughing. But he said, like, no, why? And she said, well, because there's the logo of an Endometriosis Center on this letter you just printed. I have endometriosis. And then my partner and this girl from the coffee shop started talking, and that led her into, because he knows, he's been living with me, and to be honest, he knows more than a lot of the doctors I went to because he had to learn. So he was able to tell her, look, this is where you can get more accurate information. And we quite underestimate the power of sharing accurate information and having those small conversations. Those people, like you said, might never come back to you. You might never ever see them. You don't know how huge of an impact they have on you. The impact is huge. And this is why accurate information is so important. And having those conversations, I think.
That is so true. And I think, self-advocacy, our advocacy starts with self-advocacy when you think about it, because there is days when I sort of go, oh, do I really need to talk about this again today? And sometimes all I could do is advocate for myself. I know when I was at my worst level of pain and my worst level of everything, my level of presenteeism at work was very low. So I was there in body. I was bleeding out all over the place, and I was, almost pantsing out with pain. I was there in body. I certainly was not there in any shape or form of mind, and I was probably quite useless. But advocacy doesn't have to be screaming from the rooftops. It doesn't have to be, broadcasting on media or whatever. It can be as simple as that self-advocacy, having that conversation with yourself, first of all, realistic expectations for your own body, realistic expectations for what you can achieve in a day, pacing, self-management, again, all the things. What's your outcome for this week? Your outcome for this week may be that you're just only going to, take a walk around the park, maybe in the lunchtime. If you can manage that. Somebody else's expectation for the week is that they're going to get their 10K in every day and they're not going to be a bother on them. Everybody's different. You've got this sort of wider side then of self-advocacy where you start to involve your family. And like you said, with your partner, I always think of my dad. My dad's 86. And, he can tell anybody anything about endometriosis. He's had to listen to it so long that I think it's really filtered into his brain, and to the point where I think he was actually recommending the Marina coil to somebody when he was delivering the post one day. So it was like, okay. So it's amazing the impact that you do have. And, certainly I always try and bring endometriosis to the conversation no matter where I am. That's the sort of person I am. I'm comfortable with that. But it's amazing. And I don't know whether it's just because, the law of averages or whatever way you want to work it out. I meet people with endometriosis everywhere. If I go out for dinner, I'll meet somebody who's got endometriosis, usually working there. Or
the minute you meet 10 people, there's at least 1 to 2 who have it.
Exactly.
Which is why it's such a big topic.
It's massive. And, certainly like I used to have the Endometriosis Association, the US one. I used to have their little ribbon on my handbag, and it was like, ask me about endometriosis. And you'd be amazed at the amount of people who do. So on my diary now, I have Shannon Cohen's Endo What sticker at work. And again, it's a great icebreaker because somebody will go, oh, endo, and that starts that whole conversation again. So there's loads of ways of being an advocate and loads of ways of getting that information out there that doesn't necessarily involve being very public about it or, having to sort of, go, I suppose, go screaming from the mountaintops about it as well, isn't it?
And even if it just means like cutting out the noise of, there is so much information, but unfortunately so much information is also not accurate, helpful. It's misinformation, it's out of date. Even if it means for yourself learning to cut all the noise out and really learning from the people who have been before to access the accurate, the reliable information, and being able to, even if the smallest thing you can do is telling someone, I can't tell you what to do, But here is a really reliable website that they can use. Stop getting yourself in a frenzy by reading everything you can find on the internet, because we know it's likely out of date or not helpful or misinformation. And by pointing someone in the right direction, knowing it's accurate, knowing it's reliable, knowing it's helpful, and they can then educate themselves and inform themselves and make an informed decision, because you can't make an informed decision if you're not presented with accurate information.
That's it, if you don't have all the facts. And you know, just thinking back on what you said there about that snowball effect, I think sometimes I feel like I'm screwing into the void. I'm sure you find this as well. But one incident recently that sort of made everybody smile, and it was a particular morning, my phone was bouncing, and it was so many people messaging going, have you seen X? This is misinformation to the height. Why is this being promoted? You know, this reel has been seen X number of times. And I had a look at it, and it did contain a lot of misinformation. Endometriosis, something that would guide people to a wrong form of treatment had they listened to it. And then I noticed all the comments underneath it, and they were incredibly respectful. They were incredibly, you know, polite and detailed, just pointing out that this was misinformation. And, you know, would you mind changing this? Or this is misinformation. Here's how it should be corrected. And I was so proud. My heart was bursting with pride, because again, 10 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. 3 years ago, it wouldn't have happened. People wouldn't have felt comfortable correcting misinformation. People wouldn't have felt comfortable maybe speaking out in public and identifying with endometriosis, you know. And it's sort of funny how things change. And like, I know when I started sharing media articles a long number of years back, I always flagged them for misinformation. If I was sharing something and it mentioned retrograde menstruation, I started putting that on. And that's back as early as, you know, 2011, 2012. And it's a thing that has caught on now, like, you know, that's true, which is brilliant. So if you are having to share something, because maybe the personal story is very good or the rest of the article is good, just by tagging that on sometimes as well, and then approaching maybe the author, you know, in quite a respectful way, and giving them maybe that information, you know, to update, you know, be it retrograde menstruation, be it they may have mentioned a hysterectomy or the pill or something, or pregnancy, the cure, whatever it is. You know, most editors are fine, most people, creators are fine, like, you know, but some people don't take constructive criticism very well. But I think the amount and the sense of pride within the Irish endometriosis community for tackling misinformation that particular day, I think it was immense. And you know, I think to me, it showed that people have been listening, people have been learning, they have been accumulating all the resources. And when their time comes, and be that to speak to a neighbor or a friend or a relative or to their own doctor, you know, they will be able to advocate for themselves. So I think, you know, very positive on that.
I have loads more questions being me, but I'm also very aware of the time. So I'd like to wrap this up, and I'm sure we might be speaking again and have loads more to discuss. But I'd like to wrap this up with, in my opinion, the most important question. What does a normal period look like? And I'm very aware, and we've discussing this before. It's insane how there isn't a lot of scientific consensus on what a normal period looks like.
Yep. And again,
because if you
don't
know
lack of research.
Exactly. Because loads of people would listen to all bad periods. I don't have that. But even just roughly, for anyone, the first thing I think you need to know when it comes to endometriosis is my period normal? Is it not? What's the spectrum? What would you say?
Certainly, and this is the way we were classically taught this. So if you are having pain that is not relieved by over-the-counter pain medication and traditional methods such as a heat pad or maybe a warm bath or a rest, if that pain has not been alleviated, that pain is considered then to be abnormal and should be investigated further. The second side then again, of course, is the bleeding. And for some people, it's very difficult to estimate the bleeding. And it used to be that if you're changing like a heavy tampon, you know, or a sanitary towel every couple of hours, that was thought to be a case, that you're going to be diagnosed with heavy bleeding. And I don't know if you've seen BBC Radio 5 Live had Naga Munchetti on recently, looking at people who are researching menorrhagia. And they showed one woman's blood loss for her entire period was the equivalent of what you would donate if you went to the IBTS to donate blood. So we were always told there's 2 tablespoons of blood. Like, we now know that that's not right because we weren't even measuring. We didn't even know what we were looking at.
I'm certainly not collecting it with a tablespoon. How do I know?
That's it. And like, it's very hard. I couldn't even put 2 tablespoons of sugar into something, let alone to figure out what 2 tablespoons of blood were. So even when I was bleeding very heavily, it was very hard to quantify because I might have had 2 Super Plus tampons in, and maybe like, a sanitary pad as well too, and maybe 2 pairs of underwear, and you would still bleed through all that. And you're like, maybe I'm just unlucky.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to quantify it. Now, I am very encouraged to see that there are startups out there who are looking at ways of accurately measuring menstrual flow. We are looking at some of the research that I'm involved in as well that are looking at ways of accurately measuring using AI and a wearable to measure signals within the body that may help indicate that the presence of endometriosis or other abnormalities during the menstrual cycle. Again, it would give like a high probability that you could take objectively to your GP. But because we haven't researched the menstrual cycle enough, and we're still back in this, very archaic thinking that, periods are just, they're an inconvenience, or they're something that shouldn't be talked about. For me, certainly, and when I studied Chinese medicine, I've seen the importance of periods, I've seen the importance of cycles, and the importance of it nearly being like an extra vital sign in the body. And your period can tell you so much about your state of health. And, and certainly as somebody, like, I've had a horrendous history of periods. They tried to kill me loads of times. And now, like, I don't have a uterus anymore. Like, my cycle is still trying to go for me. So it's very hard to sort of look at it as a positive thing, but you can learn a lot from your cycle and learn a lot from how your pain is, what day your pain is on. That can give certain indications as to what's happening. But certainly in the level of bleeding, if you're bleeding through things, it's certainly something that should be investigated, because there are other causes of heavy bleeding. There are other causes of pelvic pain, and they should be investigated as well. And we can become very fixated on endometriosis and adenomyosis because that's the sphere that we're in, that's their experience. But there are other reasons. And as well as that, there are treatments to help with the heavy bleeding. There are medications such as tranexamic acid. You can use mefenamic acid, which is tungsten as well, to help reduce the level of bleeding. Once all sort of, non-benign sources of bleeding have been ruled out. And in terms of pain too, just by looking at the particular times of pain, you can time your pain medication, like the likes of the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. There's a way of taking them to help reduce the pain. But until I think we have a very clearly defined and clearly researched menstrual cycle, it's very, very difficult. But one thing I would recommend that people would listen to is 28-ish Days Later, which is a BBC Radio 4 podcast by India Rakisson. It is absolutely fascinating. And I think that gives everybody a really good overview as to how variable our cycles are, how important our cycles are, and also when cycles go wrong, and how disruptive that can be. And I think that's a good baseline for anybody to have a listen to.
Because I think that's one of the most important things, having had horrendous periods from age 12. People always ask me, do you have strong periods? Do you have painful periods? And I said no. And up until 2 years ago, I was convinced that I was right with that. Until my doctor told me, you have end-stage labor pain. And he told me that the bleeding I had was like Niagara full, like bleeding, that I would have considered as normal because I never knew it any different. So, like, no one explains to us, you shouldn't be bleeding through things. The pain shouldn't be so strong that it stops you from doing things. But if this is all you assume it's normal. And thank God the uterus is gone. I do not miss 8 months of Niagara full bleeding straight 24/7. But I think it's probably one of the most important things to know. It shouldn't impact your life, and you shouldn't be bleeding through things. And it's important to get that checked. And it's one of those things that we're going to figure out by talking to people.
It is. And hopefully with the MISHRE project that we're hoping to do, it's going to be based on the ME program from New Zealand and the Menstrual Education in Schools program, where we will be able to speak to young people, explain to them what's normal, explain to them what happens when that deviates from that normal, and bearing in mind that everybody's slightly different. But I think, again, to realize the difference between discomfort and distress. And I think that's the most important thing. When it starts tipping over into you having to change your plans, you having to change your life, you're having to change your underwear and bring towels and everything to sit on everywhere you go, and you're wearing a black cardigan, everywhere, and, you're checking yourself, there's certainly red flags to look out for. And why we may not know what the perfect normal cycle is, because maybe it's just not out there, we can certainly give young people those red flags to look out for. And I think it's important to include everybody in that conversation, because it may be the partner, it may be the friend, it may be the boyfriend, whoever it is. You might not always recognize it yourself, and somebody may be that person to say to you, you're bleeding quite heavily, or your pain seems to be quite excessive. Have you looked at that? And again, if you don't have a reference point, it is very, very difficult. And given that endometriosis and adenomyosis does have a strong familial link, it may be that every female in your family has just lived like this for decades,
and we think it's normal.
Yeah. Exactly. And you really, you don't know any better, and you don't know any different. And that's the thing. But again, boils down to education, doesn't it?
I do think the friends and the partners have a huge impact on that. Like, it's like watching a kid grow, and the kid doesn't realize, because it doesn't know it was just 5 inches smaller like 2 years ago. I have no clue what inches are. Probably just said something really stupid. Anyway, but the parents do realize, because they have this objective view on, my child just grew a lot. Like, I even remember going into surgery, having traveled abroad, having gone through a horrendous time and saved so much money and organized traveling abroad for surgery, just to stand in front of the surgeon and say, do you really think I need the surgery? Sure, my pain isn't that strong. My bleeding isn't that strong. Just from a partner to be like, are you fucking serious? Like, your pain has gone so insane and so bad. You get so used to this. And I think a lot of us think we're in less pain than we actually are, because we forget that we learn to cope because we have no other choice. And then we learn to live with it. And we make it work because we have to, and we forget that it wasn't always like this, but then you forget how it used to be.
It's so true, because yesterday's bread is soon forgotten, and our body's designed to forget those things. It's designed to forget pain. I think particularly the female body is designed to forget pain, because women would not go through labor if that was the case. And, I know certainly when I was going through my last surgery, I was very much like you. I was sort of like, don't think I really need this surgery. Like, I'm not the worst case. I really don't need an expert surgeon, because I really don't have severe endometriosis. Turns out I did need somebody to actually go and take it all out, surprisingly enough. But you not just have that level of pain, but it becomes your identity. And somebody like me, where it is 99% of my identity on most days, it can be very hard to let that go sometimes, and to let go of that sort of comfort blanket of pain, which sounds like a strange thing to say, but there's a comfort in knowing that your pain is going to be there at a particular time, or that that you won't be able to do a certain thing, like, due to your pain or whatever. But there's a lot of psychological shifting around that as well, isn't there?
You anticipate, you build routines, and even if there are routines catering around a really negative effect, routines do give us predictability and security, and it's really hard then. I remember when my pain was gone, I was like, who am I? Like, sorry for being so philosophical, but I'm like, I sacrificed so much of my life and my social life and my career and everything just to make it work with the pain. Suddenly I was like, I have to build a social life again. I have to create hobbies again. I can pursue things and work again. That's scary, because for so long, slowly you build your life around it to make it work. And suddenly things change. Like, it can be quite hard.
It is. And let's hope that we're the last generation of women who've had to do that and who've had to leave things aside. And, certainly a lot of us would have changed, careers based on the level of pain and suffering that we had. And, or certainly chosen a different career path or a different educational path, or, life choices as well, like including, the sort of fertility side of things or relationship side of things. There's so many things that are impacted. And like, we could have we could dedicate an entire series to
absolutely.
this whole conversation. Couldn't we? Really good.
There's
It's
so
such
many
a broad
levels to
topic.
it.
Yeah.
So, wrapping this up now, in terms of advocacy, is there anything else you feel that's important to mention before we are?
Yeah, I think there's strength in numbers. If you are considering sharing your story, make sure that you reach out to somebody who has that accurate information. There's a lot of good resources online. You'll see resources shared through the podcast here, resources that I'll share, Johanna will share as well. You would also find that there's strength in the community in terms of support as well too, because we don't all know the answers, because I may not have an answer to your question. I might defer to Johanna or to Orla or to Amy or to anybody else within the community, because again, we all have those variable experiences. So I think it's important, if you want to sort of become part of the sort of advocacy group as a whole within Ireland, is to make those connections and not to be afraid to reach out. And I think a great time to do that is through events like the EndoMarch. I think that's important. You get to meet people face to face, because we so often hide behind screens, and not deliberately. But I certainly know when I went to first train in London, like on the helpline, and I first met somebody in person with endometriosis, it was overwhelming. But it cements the fact that it's real and that there's other people out there. And I think that's why the EndoMarches worldwide are good for that. So I would say to people, come along and, see how you feel about it. And again, maybe if that self-advocacy is just taking home a leaflet and passing that leaflet on to somebody else, I would say go for it.
And I personally, honestly, feel so excited about EndoMarch. It feels like having a really shitty job you hate, you never wanted. It's awful. And the EndoMarch on the 24th feels like the most amazing Christmas party that you're ever going to have of that job. And I can't wait to just,
I think it'll be brilliant, because we had such a good buzz last year, and it was freezing cold. It was so cold, but everybody, we chatted for hours as well too, which is brilliant. So I think it'll be great to see everybody there. It'll be great. And what's nice about it too is we're connected worldwide.
Yeah,
it is truly a worldwide EndoMarch. There's a virtual one for people who can't attend. And I think that's lovely, and we feel part of that bigger community. And as you say, it's like the workers' Christmas party, like, and for many a year, like I would have, quite a number of advocates, like we didn't meet in person for years after we've been working online together. And it's funny that, but and again, they've become, really close friends over the time. So yeah, great opportunity.
There's so much power just in connecting, sharing, realizing I'm not alone with this. There's a huge group that is there too. They're opening up, just even the being with people and the support that can come from that. And really that knowledge of, it's not the greatest thing to be suffering from. It's one of the shittiest things, to be honest. But there is so much in the community, in the sharing, the support, that can be so helpful to just help you give it a drive to move forward. And
and take the positive vibes.
Exactly. This was an amazing conversation, Kathleen. Thanks a million for letting me interrogate you, and I'm very aware of our time, so we better wrap this up and go to bed now.
Johanna, thank you so much. It's been great, and it's been difficult sitting on this side of the microphone for the night, but brilliant conversation, and thank you so much for your time. And to everybody who's listened through this, and thank you very much for listening to JOII, and we'll chat to you all again soon, and hopefully we'll see you in St. Anne's Park for the EndoMarch.